Okay, it's 20 after.
Better remind us where we were.
No, we just started.
I mean, where we were last week.
Oh, well, last week we talked about the Middle Ages, the High Middle Ages.
Yeah.
And they carried forward. You remember we started out with classical anti-Semitism of Egyptians who just kind of like some of the interstate rivalries we have, and the Egyptians didn't like the Jewish people and vice versa. And then we went to the Greeks and the Romans, who both conquered the area of the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, and they had their gripes with the people who stubbornly kept their own religion and wanted a lot of their own rules, and they made accommodations. At least the Ptolemaic Greek Empire, ruled out of Egypt, was a lot more lenient than when the Seleucids came in. The Seleucids wanted to make them into more Greek type people, more Greek practices, and they revolted against them, threw them out, which, them being enemies of the Greek occupiers and throwing them out in the Maccabean revolt, made the Romans kind of go like, hey, we've got something in common here. You know, we've been fighting for a long time against the Greeks, but that relationship soured, and around the time of Jesus, just after that, in AD 76 to AD 70, they had the first Jewish war, then they had another Jewish war in Jewish communities around the Mediterranean, and they had a second Jewish war, and the Jews were chased out for the most part from Israel. And then we had the early Christian era, and we talked about how the early Christians and the Jewish people in authority, the teachers, the rabbis, the scribes, the people who worked with the temple, they were loggerheads with the church and did not like each other at all, because the Jewish people said, nah, this isn't the Messiah. You know, this guy was executed as a common criminal, and he said lots of things that we like, but no, he's not a Messiah. He's not a divine person. He was just a kind of we don't know if he believed it or not himself, but he was not the Messiah at all. And the early Christians said, well, you people, you rejected the Son of God, and you're being too stupid and obstreperous to see the divinity of Jesus. And anyway, the Jews got tired of them saying, hey, your religion is invalid, and you no longer have, you lost your connection as a people of God when Moses broke the tablets. Anyway, so then when the Christians got control of the Roman Empire, this theological dispute where each side is basically saying to the other, your religion is a fraud. Once the Christians took control, they took over the restrictions that were made on Jewish people, and they put them on steroids and increased and increased and increased and increased to where they would, the Roman Empire, it went through a couple of very short periods where it was taking actions against Christians, but mostly it was just local. Crops fail. These people don't worship the local gods. Let's beat them up because they're the cause of our famine or whatever. But when the Christians got in charge of the Roman Empire, this theological bitterness between these two, sort of like a family argument with all the vehemence that you can have in a family argument, turned into procedures where often it was the church people trying to influence the political leaders, the emperors, to say, we want to crush these people. We want to make sure they understand they are evil. They are children of the devil and not children, as it even says in the gospel. By the time the gospel was written, these aren't John. By the time the gospel of John says these aren't children of God, these are children of the devil. At any rate, so they get all these restrictions. We talked last week about how this goes on, and then it comes up to the Middle Ages. And when the barbarians came into Rome, took over Rome, they didn't want to turn Rome into a barbarian city. They wanted to become the new Romans. And a lot of those things continued against the Jews. And then, like we said, it became a thing where the common people started to really buy into this and get a hatred of Jews. So that, for instance, before the Crusades, why should we only gain favor from God by driving infidels out of the Holy Land? Why should we leave the Christ killers here at home in our own city? Why should we leave the viper in the bedroom when we go off to fight the enemy? Let's kill all the Jews here. And it was very convenient, and a lot of the people who had borrowed money from them thought, you can eliminate the debt, or you can eliminate the debt holder. And at any rate, ends up around in the 1500s where England sends all the Jews out. Boom, gone. And then other countries follow suit. Boom, 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 boom. And as we saw on the map, a lot of them go to Eastern Europe, what later became the Pale, the communities of the Pale, P-A-L-E, which has been applied to other countries too. But at any rate, it's an area in the latter-day Soviet Union and Belarus and Ukraine and Poland and the Baltics.
I have a question. I know that at one time during the Inquisition that Turkey took all of Spain's Jews and said let them continue with their own language and everything else.
Right.
And so, they were one country that did not expel the Jews. They accepted a lot, and supposedly the guy that's over there now was going to redo that, but he hasn't.
Yeah, well, it was the Ottoman Turks. Yeah, so it was basically where Turkey is today, but a little bit more territory. But yeah, there were lots of them there that fled to, when they had fled from the area now of Israel into various places and gone around in Europe and gone with the Normans into Britain, and then they had to go back. And some of them went back to the Middle East. A lot of them went to North Africa, and a lot of them went to Eastern Europe. Okay, now we're at the end of the Middle Ages, and what comes late in the Middle Ages? What's a big thing in the life of the church that happened?
Crusades.
After the Crusades, yeah, Crusades, but then
After the
in
Crusades.
Europe, after the Crusades. What's the big, there were a lot of people in the Catholic Church.
Oh, the Reformation.
The Reformation, yeah. And the Reformation was one of the reform movements. What we actually call the Counter-Reformation was in some aspects a movement within the Catholic Church to reform it that was already trying to make changes. Now, Martin Luther took his changes in another direction, but there was already an impetus to change it because there were a lot of things wrong that people in the church recognized. And we think of the Reformation often as a time when, at least in common parlance, it's kind where they advanced and religion became more personal and people started to read the Bible rather than just have it read to them. And people sometimes would think about it as a change where they move into more modern times. It's not really that. It's not the precursor of modern liberalism that some people might think, at least in the areas that it influenced. It was sort of the last kick of the medieval world. The people who were in the Reformation did not want to have people understand and allow them to worship in their own way. They basically wanted to replace the Catholic Church. They thought that they had the correct way, just like Christians had with the Jews. We've got the right way. We're interpreting the prophets right. We're interpreting the laws of God right, and you're not. And later on, it did help the Jews somewhat because in the Reformation, of course, you split into Protestants and Catholics, and so you had a lot of the hatred devoted towards each other, rather than just against this, against the funny kid in the room to them. I'm not equating Jews with the funny kid in the room, but I'm just saying, yeah. Somebody that everybody picks on, all of a sudden now they're fighting each other, and they're not so concerned about making life hell for this person over here, who's a little bit different from them in practice or origin or whatever. And it did end up, making a more plural society that had more groups, that did allow the Jews a little bit of respite for the moment. But if you want to look at it, you remember when we talked about it, we said that these leaders that we know of in the church, like Augustine, who said, yeah, you need to keep the Jews, let them live, because they need to be alive at the time Jesus comes back so they can atone for their, so they can be punished for their horrible crimes. Yeah, that's Augustine. So we found a lot of the church fathers that people revere in the church as some of the most able theologians and some of the most deeply religious people also were virulently anti-Semitic in much of their writings. Well, who do you think of when you think of the Reformation? Martin Luther, right. And he was followed by Calvin and Zwingli and these other people. But we think of Martin Luther as the sort of iconic moving force in that. And putting aside the fact that there was a whole lot of politics in it, because they could only preach if they were supported by the local leader, and some of these local leaders wanted some freedom away from the other monarchs that were favored by the church. Anyway, okay. I forgot who Martin Luther's patron was, but Martin Luther he's not a modern man. If you read his writings, he talks about, one of the times he physically did battle with the devil. He chased him off by throwing an inkwell at him. Yeah, but Martin Luther thought that the Jews, along with the Turks and heretics within the church, were the instruments of the devil's war against the true gospel of Christ. And Luther's own theology had nothing to do with modern racial theories, although modern racial theorists would use, anti-Semitics would use Luther's arguments for their point. And he was one way he was like the old school in that for Martin Luther, how do you think a Jew could cure his status?
Converting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what would he be after he converted? Be a full Christian. So how much of the taint of being Jewish would stay with you for Martin Luther after you converted? None. You'd be washed in the blood of the Lamb, or I don't know the words he would use, but you'd be washed in, your conversion would free you of the sin of any previous association.
So was that an active thing that Martin Luther did? He'd see a Jewish community and say, well...
No, not necessarily. I don't think so. But there was no stigma attached, like we'll see in just a bit.
No stigma to changing over?
No stigma attached to you by virtue of your being descended from Jewish parents, a Jewish birth, a Jewish education, any of that stuff. Yeah, it's like anybody else. You could be a Roman pagan and you could convert, and boom, you were one of the elect.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. And oh, by the way, I'm wearing this blue and yellow.
Yes, I see.
Yeah, for a reason.
I see that.
Yeah. And he was moderately charitable early on in his life, but in his later writings, he became really harsh. So he said, with the Jews, what we should do is severe mercy. And this is a direct translation of some of the things he said. So I'm not just, paraphrasing this, but he talks about what shall we do with this damned, rejected race of the Jews? We cannot quench the I'm skipping over some of this, but they live among us. We know about their lying and blasphemy and curses. We cannot tolerate them if we do not wish to share in their lives curses and blasphemy. In this way, we cannot quench the inextinguishable fire of divine rage, which means them burning in hell eventually. We must pray and reverently, or perhaps we can save a few from the flames. They are surely being punished 1,000 times more than we might wish them, in hell. Said, let me give you my honest advice. Okay, whenever I hear these kind of words, it's usually pretty scary when people are going to open up and say, okay, I'm going to give you my unfiltered view now. So let me give you my honest advice. First, their synagogues or churches should be set on fire. And whatever doesn't burn, you got to take apart and you got to cover it over with dirt so you cannot even tell that a synagogue was there. It's like the Romans, destroying Carthage and then salting and the earth so nothing will grow there again. And it says, all this ought to be done for the honor of God and of Christianity, And in order so God can see that we are Christians and that we have not wittingly tolerated or approved such public lying, cursing, and blaspheming of his son and his Christians, as the Jews do.
So Martin Luther said this,
Martin Luther wrote this.
Yeah.
Or it was written by a scribe for him.
Right.
Secondly, okay, that's just the first part. Okay, there's more. Wait, there's more. Okay, secondly, their homes, the Jews' homes, should likewise be broken down, not just taken, but destroyed and covered over in the same way. For they perpetuate the same things they do in the synagogues. The same reason, then you take the Jews and you put them under one roof or in a stable like gypsies. Now, what's this sound like? Who also took Jews from their homes and took all their property? Hitler, that's right. And even before that, when they were driven into the Pale, and even before that, when they lived in ghettos, but Hitler was the worst. Hitler refined this to the highest degree. Okay, put them like gypsies so they realize they are not masters in our land, but miserable captives. And thirdly, no, wait, there's more. Third, they should be deprived of their prayer books and Talmuds, because they have such idolatry, lies, cursing, and blasphemy. They're taught from those books. Yeah. Fourthly, we're not through. Rabbis must be forgiven to teach anymore. And if they do, it's death. Fifthly, okay, lest they get away. Because what are you going to do if you live in an area where they start doing that? Yeah, you're going to vote with your feet. You're going to leave. Nah, Passport and traveling privileges must be absolutely forbidden to the Jews. And sixthly, they have to be stopped from usury, from lending money. And all their cash and valuables of silver and gold ought to be taken from them and put aside for safekeeping.
For safekeeping?
Yeah, because everything they possess, it says, for this reason, as said before, everything that the Jews, that they possess, they stole and robbed from us, meaning Christians, through their usury, for they have no other means of support. Such evilly acquired money is cursed, unless we can reform their evil money. Cursed unless, with God's blessing, it is put to some good and necessary use. Okay?
Oh my gosh.
We're not done yet. Seventh, this is Luther, Martin Luther.
Yes,
Seventh,
Martin Luther.
let the young and strong Jews and Jewesses be given the flail, the axe, the hoe, the spade, the distaff, and spindle. Let them earn their bread by the sweat of their nose, as enjoined upon Adam's. It's just because it's wrong for Gentiles, for Goyim, people who are non-Jews, to work, and Jews to sit in their leisure, from our money they got through evilness, blah, blah, blah. What does that remind you of? That it will be good and wise to put these people to work at hard manual labor, and that somehow that will benefit them.
Slavery?
Is slavery, yeah. What did it say above Auschwitz, above the gate?
Oh, you work and you shall be free, or something like that?
Arbeit macht frei.
Oh.
Work shall set you free.
Yeah.
Yeah, work will make you free. There was a couple at different camps. There was slight variations of that sort of, but it was all the sort of same theme of, this will, you can find improvement here. Yeah. Okay. So we're seeing echoes of this stuff. Okay, and at a trial, at the Nuremberg trials, and everybody knows what the Nuremberg trials are, right? Okay, it's where they tried the Nazi criminals. One of the people on trial was Julius Streicher, who was a Nazi propagandist, and he ran the anti-Semitic weekly, their weekly magazine, Der Stürmer, which was like the voice of the Nazi party. And he argued in court, he said, if I'm to be standing arraigned on these charges, he said, so should be Martin Luther. And
Well, he's probably right, but Martin Luther was dead.
yeah. But if anybody still doubts that the modern anti-Semitism has its roots and continuity with the older theologically based anti-Semitism, all you have to do is read these things one after the other, and you go, yeah, it's
Wow.
the
This is
same
good.
thing. It's just they continue the hate with a new justification. But Europe has been primed forever to do this.
This is eye-opening.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
I never realized Martin Luther was that vindictive against Jews.
Oh, Whaley,
I mean,
I-
I guess I just, cause you
Yeah,
never ever heard about that.
Right,
You
you
know what I'm
always thought he
saying?
was pretty good
no,
guy.
they give us, and Augustine and all these church
Yeah,
fathers.
I mean,
Wow.
yeah, I would have never have fathomed that he was that, I don't know why, I mean,
fanatical against the Jews.
yeah, I just never realized he was,
How do you think of him? How do you think of, before you heard this, how did you
Well,
think of Martin Luther?
I just felt like he was a reformer of the Catholic Church,
Yeah.
got rid of things in the Catholic Church.
that's kind of what I
Never
thought.
did I know.
Well,
all
me
this
too.
other stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
me too, that's what I thought.
I just assumed he was always, you know, from what I was studying that he was just against the Catholic Church. And not totally against it, but it disagreed with some of
Yeah,
their beliefs in that and wrote the Reformation. And I never realized, never even would have
Yeah.
thought that he was this disgruntled against Jews and belittling them and
so this part of,
crucifying them all over
this
again.
got buried, this part got buried.
Well-
It's never been in anything I've ever studied with Martin Luther. I mean,
Now I know some people might object to this, and I'm not saying a direct link, but if you look at Joseph Stalin, if you grew up in the Soviet Union during the Stalinist era, he was revered. You never heard about all the millions of people that he had executed in camps, and his, you don't get it. I did a research paper on I was in a Reformation history course in college, and I had to do one on a guy who was hated by the Protestants and the Catholics. His name was Michael Servetus, and I read the transcripts from his trial from Geneva. So I knew I was getting the actual words. These were the court recorders for Calvin's court, and so they would have been checked and be accurate. I had Servetus's actual words at his trial, and I had Calvin's actual words at his trial, and it opened my eyes to John Calvin, who was, I won't give you my opinion of John Calvin, and I don't know his anti-Semitic, or I don't know what his attitudes were towards Jewish people, any prospective anti-Semitism, but I can tell you, I came away after that, after reading his own words and hearing him where he felt free to speak because he controls Geneva, and it's not a pretty thing. It's not what you're taught in Sunday school. That's for sure. Okay, eye-opening.
I think if we go back and look, if we ever studied a lot of the Christian people that started our churches and all, we would be very upset with every one of them.
oh, yeah.
We are, yeah, and a lot of these people who are the most devout, like Augustine. Augustine was considered, literally, he's pointing to the example of the one who was not virulently anti-Jewish, and yet he said, yes, let them live, like don't kill them at least, and because we need to keep them alive so they can be crushed by God in his judgment at the, end of days. And okay, now we're going to jump ahead, because Protestants and Catholics, I'm not going to go over it, but they slaughtered each other. And one of my,
In Ireland,
Oh,
I
yeah.
have yet to figure out exactly how they know who are the Catholics and who are the Protestants on the streets.
a lot of
right?
times it would be social standing, dress, things like that, or just where you're at. And that's another story, because the people who were brought into Ireland, the people in Northern Ireland who were fighting against the people who were Catholic, they were brought in by the English precisely to displace and drive out or kill the Irish. Like, we're going to take, because Ulster, the area which is Northern Ireland now, was the most patriotic, the most anti-English area anti-British area in Ireland. And they decided, we're going to pull up by the roots the weeds of Ireland because they grow so thickly up here in terms of, metaphorically, because this was the most patriotic Irish place, so we're going to drive them out. They can either go into the bogs to the west or die. And if they we'll take them out, we'll tell them to go. If they don't go, we'll take them with a bayonet. If they won't go, we'll kill them.
So this was part of the Troubles that they had?
Oh, yes. And that's why,
And the Troubles
and
are
they-
still there.
now
but-
they brought in people, the lowland Scots, a lot of them. They brought them in to settle there. They said, okay, you can be here and you can be, you can be dirt under the English feet, or you can be the rulers over here. Well, we'll go over and be the, we'll rise up above the locals instead of being below the English. Now we're above the locals. And long story. We'll go to
We're
that.
talking about things that happened in the last 50 years or less.
No, we're talking about things that happened.
No, I mean, this
long
is,
time. Oh.
the Troubles went on not too long ago.
The Troubles have been going on for a long time. Yeah, we call it the Troubles because when it started again in the 80s,
Yeah,
that's
that's what I'm
that's the
thinking
period
about.
we call the Troubles. But
Right.
now that the Irish have been fighting against the Irish Protestants.
Historically, the Irish were the more civilized group between the Irish and the English, the people in Britain.
Yeah,
Historically, they were. They
Yeah.
had better rules, they took better care of their people and everything else.
It might be. You have to look at the different times because, of course, England got hit and pretty well, wiped by the
I'm
at least.
talking about
or-
back in the 300s and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's
They were very advanced, the Irish were.
yeah, and then they both got the Vikings. Ugh.
the Vikings.
It's sad to say that so much of the killing in our world from the beginning of time on up has been brought on by religion, yet religion purports to be love one another. I mean, it just seems like, almost like a play on words, like you talk about religion, and it means, when I think of religion and going to church, I think of being kind and respectful and, loving others and doing things for other people and that. And then you turn around and religion is the, I don't know if it's the cause, but the people's using of religion for all this death and punishment and excuse to
Yep.
do things to other people. And that's what a lot of it was, ooh, we'll use religion as an excuse to kill the
Yeah,
Jews.
if you look at the German belt buckles in World War II, anybody know what they say on them? Gott mit uns.
Oh, God.
God is with us. That might have been from World War One, but I think it was World War II as well. It might have been just World War One, but God is with us, on your belt buckle, which is a curious location for it. But let me race through this if I can a little bit, because we'll probably finish up next week. But we're trying to work up through the Nazis, through World War II, okay, and see the continuity. We're going to kind of skim over this real quickly. That when Napoleon came over, we're not going to talk about in the French Revolution because it's a topic on its own, and there's lots of sort of rises and falls about what were the status of Jews under the French revolutionary government before Napoleon took over in 1805 or whatever it is. He declared himself emperor, 1803, 1805, whatever. But at any rate, under Napoleon, there started what you could call the Mosaic bargain, and a lot of the Jews got a lot of rights, a whole lot. But then within a century and a half, 2/3 of European Jewry would be annihilated in the Holocaust. So what the French had asked, what Napoleon asked of them, was just basically, Napoleon said, I would have you be French. I want you to be French. I don't know what the words were, but basically the Napoleonic bargain was that they would be accepted as fellow citizens, but they have to stop being traditional Jews. In other words, you're not governed you're governed by the laws of the state, not the laws of the Torah. And your law isn't administered by rabbinical courts, it's administered by the court of law, just regular. And you become Frenchmen, distinguishable from other Frenchmen only because of your religious or Mosaic persuasion. The role of the Torah was now restricted to religion, as Christians saw it, and for Jews, it meant a substantial loss of identity. In other words, they didn't live in their community ruled by their own sorts of laws. And they continued to be a foreign body in, people regarded them as alien and threatening, but they got a lot of rights they hadn't had before. And basically what he's asking them to do is assimilate, which is what the Greeks wanted them to do, especially the Seleucid Greeks. Not in Tsarist Russia. Really, this didn't really work in Tsarist Russia. They sort of stayed in their previous place in Tsarist Russia and those places in Eastern Europe that were controlled by Russia. But this was also in America, and where you assimilate, you have to assimilate. And what this did was it changed a lot. American Jews were the most assimilated of all, but it changed them so that they started to think of themselves as Frenchmen in France first. And it was a bigger change for the Jews than the Christians, because they started not to think of themselves as Jews bound by these laws and these people of God. They started to think of themselves as, well, that's my religion, but I'm a Frenchman or an American. And that's a radical transformation in Jewish identity. And it's important even to today, even in Israel, where people think, I'm an Israel, I'm a citizen of Israel, rather than just their loyalty is to their country, rather than to their religious strictures. So
are all the people in Israel Jews, or do Christians live in Israel?
There's
too?
some Christians. There's a whole lot of Palestinians. That's another topic that we're not going to talk about,
Talk about that.
because we read about in our history, they talked about Jewish villages in Arab areas where people were killed or run out at the point of the bayonet, where the Arabs seized their land. And guess what? It went the other way too.
Yes.
It's like Protestants and Catholics. Now, my relative who lived in Switzerland, he was a preacher, probably a Protestant preacher. I don't know, but I'm assuming a Protestant. And he was happened to be on the wrong canton or area, the wrong state within Switzerland when the Catholics took over their area, or the Protestants. And so they hanged him. He either could convert or be hanged. And he said, no, I'm not going to change my religion. So he was hanged. So his 3 sons fled to Germany and came over to the United States. And this was early 1700s when they came to the U.S., but he was killed long before that. At any rate, so, and they would slaughter each other. They're like, the Catholics and the Protestants would take a community, and the people would run for sanctuary in the church, and they would drag them all out and kill them, murder them all, men, women, and children.
Going and going.
Yeah, it does. And you could tell who they were also because, in some ways, the manner of their dress also exposed them. And it's interesting that the hatreds against the Jews became secularized later, and liberals and Marxists and Nazis, all of them, and right-wing people, for their own reasons, had reasons to hate the Jews and consider them. They were still seen as potential enemies and aliens, and as a problem. There was the problem of Jews living in, like even Lindbergh said, yeah, someday we're going to have to deal with the problem of the Jews. Okay, now we're going to talk about Jews in the modern world, because now they've gained a lot of rights, but now comes up what Jean kept asking me, what about the Nazis and those things? It's Jews in the modern world, and the concept of what came in. Jews are not just a religion, they are a race, right? So what do you do if you've got, your son and he's going to go for a job interview, and if he wears scruffy clothes, do you send him to the job interview? Yeah, but what do you do?
Clean him up.
Yeah, clean him up. Well, you put him in different clothes, right? You put him in clothes that match the job he's going to go to. Okay, that's what they did with all these, exactly the sort of same anti-Jewish feelings, but now you base them on race. And there's nowhere, some places like in Russia, there was still a lot of traditional Christian anti-Judaism, but you have the more modern as well. But now true anti-Semitism made their appearance, because Jews were going to be identified, and I'll tell you why it started in a second, identified as a race, and the characteristics could never be eliminated, even by what?
Intermarriage.
Even by, well, they don't want them to intermarry, but it wouldn't be stopped by intermarriage. But in the old days, it wouldn't be stopped by intermarriage. How would it?
Conversion.
Conversion. Yeah, he can convert. He's just hiding his Jewish identity. He's still a Jew.
You know, I've read about a lot of people who's during the Nazi era in Germany, who the parents converted or raised their children in the Christian church, but once the children found out that their family was Jewish, historically, a lot of them kind of, went back to to their historic religion in their family.
Yeah, it's a historic religion, but it's also a historic identity.
Well,
so that
that's true, yeah.
so that they're even though their parents may have converted to Christianity or something, they may still have the sort of societal values and community ties with all these people who still are within the Jewish community, and so that resonates with them because that's the basic temper and tempo of the family, and and the grandparents would say Yiddish words if they, got surprised and dropped something.
Is that kind of what Christian Jews are, maybe?
And the Christian
They keep with their traditions, yet they
Nah.
are believers?
Christian Jews is something that a lot of fundamentalists they want the Jews to see the light, Jews for Jesus and all this, and it's
I think it's something someone concocted to allow them to say, like, these Jews really aren't Jewish, they're converting over to Christian. Yeah, we can come up with names for all kinds of.
Yeah,
How
and
did
it's
did your mother remain Jewish all her life as far
No.
as following the Jewish
No, because
religion?
when she moved to America, where they lived, there were no synagogues or anything, so she couldn't keep going with that faith, so she didn't. We joined St. Paul Church, and
plus the Jewish identity would often be held against you. Karl Marx, the communist, his father, decided, before Marx was even born, a year before he was born, he switched over, changed his last name to Marx, and because it's just not a good career move to be identified as Jewish. We don't know how fervent or not his father was, but he didn't want to be associated with the Jewish community. And we start to see this, especially in Russia, you see this perfect fusion of the old religious anti-Judaism with new racial antisemitism. Now, what could be worse about being identified as a race other than being, you can't cure it? What else had Christians said about the Jews? What had Augustine said about what should happen to the Jews? Keep them alive until the final judgment. Let them live, because they need to be alive to witness the final judgment and get crushed by God. But he probably didn't say crushed by God, I'm sure. But to witness their perfidy as a race can be punished. If you take that away, then the Jewish solution isn't to at least keep them alive until you can take all their property and stuff. But you have no reason not to just extinguish them. Because, surprise, there was one benefit of Christian philosophy, which was to not murder them outright, at least not in large numbers. It was a restraint applied by Christian theology. And you have people, like in pre-war Germany, where all this really comes to fruition in the worst way. The Jewish minority, what percentage do you think there was? In Germany? In Germany,
itself?
before World War II, yeah.
I don't really think it was a huge minority.
You're correct.
It was. I mean, I know it was. I know it wasn't. Everybody thinks it was, but it was a very small, minute part.
It was less than 1%.
Yeah.
Okay, and
Wow.
and
That's why you had to reach out and find them all over the place.
well, the thing is that there were some of the people who were prominent and successful in areas like the Rothschilds in banking, or there were some very prominent, successful Jewish people. But you know what? There were some very prominent Polish people. There were some very prominent, some people who were wealthy, who had come originally from Poland or Italy or America or Britain or France, and they weren't pointed out. Look, they've become successful. They are they are laughing at us because we work hard and we don't get paid. In other words, it's just like the Italians. Nobody goes and kills Italians because the Romans murdered Jesus. They selectively use this as an excuse because there were some, for instance, in banking, like the Rothschilds as an example, there were some families that were very wealthy that were Jewish. Most were not. Most were very poor. They were poor or very poor, and yet they would point to this one or two or three or four examples and say, see how the Jewish are laughing at you. They're living off the booty that they, as a race, stole from you.
Wow.
Okay. So it's less than 1%. Okay, we talked about.
We need to wind up pretty soon.
Yeah, we do. I'm watching that. So what I'm going to talk about next time is, I'm going to finish up with one more little thing, and then next time, to finish up, we're going to talk about the scientists, the early scientists. Who knows the name of Linnaeus?
Yes,
Linnaeus.
yes. The one who did taxonomy.
The one who did taxonomy. The one who studied, was it?
The classes.
Yeah,
Yeah, he's the guy that did the
Yeah,
species and
yeah,
genus and all that.
yeah.
Yeah.
the
He's-
kingdoms, the
Yeah,
kingdom.
kingdoms, phylum, species.
Oh,
Yeah, and guess what else he dabbled in? He dabbled in his own little sort of
Eugenics.
anthropology and races.
Eugenics.
No,
I
not,
guess.
not eugenics.
Well, I
but
guess it must have
maybe-
been the basis of it.
Well, yeah, it was the basis of it.
Yeah.
But we have other examples of people who have sort of withdrawn out from society because their ways are a little bit different. And nobody goes, there's no pogroms against the Amish. There's not, we don't go out in, people don't go out in Lancaster, Pennsylvania and go, shoot up the Amish or drive them out of there. They've decided to withdraw and have their own particular heritage with their own particular rules. But we're going to see that how these new scientific theories were used as a basis for race and to use to bring in all the old hatreds and strictures of anti-Semitism, put on a new jacket, brush their hair, and pretend that they're something that has a scientific basis. So
Wow.
we'll finish that up next week. And now it's going to be the last week because I'm gone after that.
Are you going to France for a couple weeks?
No, I'm going to go up. I have to go down to Florida and I have to go to Pennsylvania.